I mean, just the pomposity of, their response, well, we're going to make some mistakes. Well, you know why government moves slowly sometimes is because people die when you make mistakes. And, somebody has their disability benefits interrupted, for 2 months. I know that doesn't seem like a big deal for you, Elon Musk, but for them, that means they've lost their housing and they're not eating. They're now homeless. And, in the meantime, they've had their ID stolen and they may never recover from that event.
Welcome to Fight Back Radio, production of fightbacknews.org, taking you to the heart of the people's struggle. I'm your host, Richard Berg, and today we're going to be talking about federal employees and some of the attacks that Donald Trump has waged against the federal workforce, probably an opening salvo to all union employees and the working class in general. But our guest today is a longtime president of the American Federation of Government Employees, Local 2547. It's Pat Kearns, who's as I said, the president of that local 1,100 member local in Iowa City, Iowa, at the Veterans Administration at the hospital there. And Pat's also been a registered nurse for 30 years and has worked in the Veterans Administration for that entire time. So welcome to Fight Back Radio, Pat.
Thank you, Richard.
Yeah, it's good to have you here. So let's start off. I mean, the headlines in the papers have been, Elon Musk with his chainsaw and whatever, and going to cut all the waste and fat in the government. And, they started off by laying off all the probationary employees across the board, I think tens of thousands of people. Could you talk a little bit about what exactly happened there? And then your union has been in the forefront, your national union, the American Federation of Government Employees, in filing lawsuit and fighting that. So could you give us a little rundown of what's happened and where we're at now?
Yeah, so there have been 2 rounds of these, people have referred to them as layoffs and a lot of things, but they're straight up terminations. And so the first round was non-bargaining unit employees, essentially first level supervisors and, folks that were in unorganized areas still within the federal government. And then the last round, which was 2 weeks ago now, was bargaining unit employees across the federal government. So basically, when you're a probationary employee in the federal government, you either serve a 1 or a 2-year probationary period, which, the law is very clear on. You can be separated for issues of conduct or performance. Either you can't do your job well or you're doing things within your job that are, detrimental. Typically, only about 1% of probationary employees are terminated. Now, a lot of people leave within that first year, probably, I think it's around 15%, just because they realize, this isn't what I thought it was going to be. And the federal government, is not like working in the private sector where, particularly things like time and attendance and things like that are kind of loosey-goosey. And if you come in an hour late, you work an hour late. And, that we're very anal about that stuff.
Yeah.
So, this ability to fire a probationary employee does exist, but there has to be a basis for it. And what, essentially the Musk crew and, the head of OPM have decided is that there doesn't have to be a reason to fire somebody in their probationary period, and that there is no formal appeal right, but and technically, they wouldn't be covered by, say, our master agreement to go through the grievance process, or through the statutory process where they can go to the Merit Systems Protection Board as a vested employee. But they also have to follow their own regulations. Their own regulations say that it has to be a cause of, it still has to be for cause. It has to be either performance or conduct. So they've sent out thousands and thousands of these letters that are exactly the same. The only thing that changes on it is the name. And it says that they're being terminated for performance issues. Well, that obviously doesn't pass the sniff test because there's no way that they evaluated thousands of employee records. In fact, they didn't ask for any records. OPM did not, from the agencies about any of these employees. And even if they had, OPM itself is basically HR for the heads of agencies. They give advisories, where they handle the benefits package that all federal employees get, that kind of thing. They handle retirements. Once you leave employment, you get paid by OPM at the end of the day. So the heads of the agencies are not necessarily in agreement with what OPM's doing, certainly below the level of political appointees. But Trump and Musk and the associated powers have truly installed some god awful people as the heads of these agencies. Hegseth, and particularly in the Department of Defense, he has not stood up to what's going on. Interestingly, the Secretary of the VA has given lip service about not negatively impacting veterans' care and the ability to run the hospitals, but that's all that it's been. There's still a hiring freeze on within VA hospitals. They still let the terminations of probationary employees go forward. The union nationally, our first step when they went after the non-bargaining unit people was to essentially reach out to everybody in the hospital and say, we don't care whether you're in the bargaining unit or not. If you get one of these termination notices, we want to see it immediately. And essentially that was to give us a look at what they were doing. And I think it, made it clear to the, non-bargaining unit employees around us that, and to our membership that they needed to pay attention to what was going on. It was important. They needed to take care of their coworkers and make sure that if they, the person sitting next to them gets one of these notices, they're a brand new employee. They may not know to come see us because that's the other thing is the union never got any of these notices, even once they were giving them to bargaining unit people.
Oh, wow.
Which is a huge violation of our master agreement because we've got some very strong contract language about right to representation. And, they affirmatively have to, the employee basically has to refuse representation rather than ask for it. So that was very interesting to look at. But so by the time that the probationary terminations were issued to the bargaining unit, National Union already had the pieces in place for what they knew they were going to go forward. And essentially they filed a lawsuit, I think it's in the Northern District of California, where it landed. And that was along with, the National Nurses Union, SEIU, and I'm drawing a blank.
Yeah, AFGE was in there. I saw a couple others, I think, too.
NEFI, National Federal Employees. Anyway, AFGE is the largest of those as far as representation in the federal sector. And I think that it's, it was interesting to me that, basically they filed it, had oral arguments, and the judge ruled from the bench that the terminations were illegal. And, they didn't, they filed it, had oral arguments, and the judge ruled from the bench that the terminations were illegal. And, they filed it, had oral arguments, and the judge ruled from the bench that the terminations were illegal. And, they filed it, had oral arguments, and the judge ruled from the bench that the terminations were illegal. And, they filed it, had oral arguments, and the judge ruled from the bench that the terminations were illegal. And, they filed it, had oral arguments, and the judge ruled from the bench that the terminations were illegal. And, they filed it, had oral arguments, and the judge ruled from the bench that the terminations were illegal. And, they filed it, had oral arguments, and the judge ruled from the bench that the terminations were illegal. And, they filed it, had oral arguments, and the judge ruled from the bench that the terminations were illegal. And, they filed it, had oral arguments, and the judge ruled from the bench that the terminations were illegal. And, they filed it, had oral arguments, and the judge ruled provided a written opinion yet, I guess, last I looked. But the desire to go forward with, regardless of what the law clearly states, I think is the big difference between this and, say, the previous Trump administration, where he had an inner circle of people that told him what he wanted to hear, but now that circle is much larger, and from the attorney general down, and in the various legal structures, there's people that are willing to carry out illegal orders, regardless of a court decision. Like in the past, if an administration had gotten a decision like the one in California, they would have stopped what they were doing, and at least said that they were stopping what they were doing. That's not the case this time.
So they're just blatantly violating the law, it sounds like, or at least a judge's decision. So has there been? Let me ask first: has there been any effect in Iowa City, where you're at? Have they let people go, or?
Yeah, so we lost 6 employees here, which was a relatively small number compared to some of the other locals in our region. The Fargo Hospital had 50 employees terminated. And most of these, for the bargaining unit jobs, most of these were entry-level jobs. And at least, depending on the position, in the positions that they fired, actually, the representation of veterans is much higher. Across the whole system, about 25% of our employees are veterans. But they were going after a subset of employees that weren't, they had an exclusionary list of basically direct care type positions, nurses, doctors, respiratory therapists, and then which left out some very big patches of people like finance, logistics was and a couple other larger departments. And like here, we lost 3 people in a department that has about 12 people in it that does logistics for the hospital, which means they do everything from buying our Band-Aids to delivering those to sterile closets on the floors, and making sure that supply inventories are correct and that all the expired goods get taken away. And they do a whole host of things. And these are the things that are really going to hamstring the ability of VA to carry on long term, because now they're saying that, okay, these probationary employees that we fired, those positions are now gone. You can't replace them. You can't hire a contractor to do that job. You can't detail an employee from another area of the hospital to do that job. And you're just out of luck. That position no longer exists. And I know that. And then on top of that we have this ongoing freeze that Trump ordered across the federal government. And then the VA was very quick to say, "Oh no, we don't have a freeze. We have this exclusion list of positions that we are going to continue to recruit for." And they have. And they've posted the jobs on the government recruiting website. And people apply for them, and they go through the recruitment process, and they get to the end of it, and OPM blocks them from offering the job.
That's even worse.
It's
you go through all that worse. Work, and it's far worse.
And applying for a job in the federal government, whether you're applying to be a housekeeper or a physician or a nurse, is an onerous task. It's not like applying for most jobs, and you have to, in addition to just a mound of paperwork, there's all sorts of invasive questions about your life and where you've lived and what you've done, and which is the laughable part of it is when Elon Musk talks about, we only want the best people. and he's got, some 19-year-old kid who's, been terminated from his internship because he was stealing corporate secrets. That guy's never going to be able to get a federal job on any kind of reasonable basis. And that's what's real. It's just galling. And I've many years I've said that bad managers make for good union recruiters. And Elon Musk has really outdone himself for mobilizing and angering and really motivating people to become more active. It's been really encouraging.
But let me ask you. I mean, I want to talk a little bit. We'll get into some of the big picture stuff here. But let's look at Iowa City's Veterans Hospital. You represent pretty much everybody there that's not management. From housekeepers to RNs like you, up to even some physicians, etc. Can you talk a little bit, about the patients that you serve, who are veterans, people that have served in the military in the United States, but some of the specialized care that you provide for these folks? And I know, like in your profession, there's been a national shortage of nurses across the board, not just VA, but everywhere. And when you're saying we're going to cut back on people that are hard to get in the first place, it seems like that's an attack on our veterans in this case, and in some cases it's a very cruel attack. Maybe if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think our patients are, very vulnerable for a host of reasons that, from, not, it's overwhelmingly majority male. And, many of them are averse to healthcare, mental health care, primary care, and maintaining any kind of, ongoing relationship with the healthcare setting, I think, is very challenging. I think part of the mandate that the VA has, though, is to constantly be doing outreach and, meeting folks kind of where they are, whether they be homeless, whether they, are just out in the community and haven't been to a doctor in 30 years, and getting folks enrolled in for any and all the benefits that they're entitled to. And I think that that's the difference between the VA and, most healthcare systems that don't have that kind of mandate to, actively go out and seek the people that they serve, rather than just, taking whoever shows up at the door. And I think that that's it's a very different mission, and it's, I think people are very invested in that and have a lot of ownership of making sure that our veterans get all the care that they deserve, and that they get it in a environment and in a manner that speaks to the fact that they've already earned it. And I think that trying to get that across to somebody like President Trump or Elon Musk, that public service has a real meaning, and that it's not just some punchline or a grift, is hard. And I think articulating that, on out to the public in general has been a challenge. I think that obviously, our friends in the labor movement get it. I think that the folks that, are advocating for, retention in Medicaid and, expansion of healthcare benefits get it. But like folks that really haven't thought about healthcare, it's behooving upon us to really go out there and put out there the things that we do that impact people's everyday lives, in all aspects of the work that people in the federal government do. It's nobody really has an idea of what they're missing till it's not coming, or, until we have a Flint with, the test results that were, fraudulently made to hide,
Yeah, right.
lead in the water. And I think that is important to articulate to people, but it's particularly bad for the veterans if that system isn't there, because, and I clinically, I work in the ICU. So, my circle in most of healthcare would be really small. My job is to, stabilize you, get you to well enough to get out of the ICU. But, typically it's not unusual at all for the nurses in the ICU to be talking about discharge. That patient is ours from now till forever. And their family is our responsibility from now to forever. And so if we can get them, educated and engaged, while they're in the ICU about the benefits that they have and, services that they may need, that's going to make everything go better for them for the next 5 years and not, the next 5 days. And I think that's the investment that, whether you're a social worker, an RN, or even a housekeeper. I mean, we'll have housekeepers chatting with people in the hallway, and they say, "Oh, I'm here for this, and I just got my, service connection up," and people will go, "Oh, well, have you done this, and this yet?" Because our housekeepers, for instance, those jobs are specifically set aside for veterans, and basically you can't get a housekeeping job here if you're not a veteran. So yeah. I think that, and people are very, very much about advocating for their fellow veterans. And I think that there's just a much deeper sense of, obligation to these patients than in the rest of healthcare, I think.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. It's one is it's not profit driven, so there's not a push to let's provide as little as possible, and supervisors trying to cut corners. But as you mentioned, there's also I think a certain brotherhood, sisterhood, siblinghood amongst veterans that people that have served that can appreciate where the other people what they've been through. But could you speculate for a minute if Trump and Musk get their way with the federal cuts, and as it relates to the veterans hospitals and the Veterans Administration, could you speculate a little bit on what that would look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think their intention is to, on one hand, say that, oh no, our intention is not to negatively impact veterans, and we haven't had a freeze on jobs, and while on the other hand waiting for the system to fail. And and I'll take Iowa City as a microcosm of that. And we have anywhere between 4 and 5 openings on every floor for RNs in the building. We can tolerate having 3 vacancies on a floor, 4, 5 for a short period of time, and then everyone that leaves, we're not being able to replace, either because the well has been poisoned now, because who would apply for a job in the federal government at this point? Especially for, and again, I'm just going to use nurses as the example because the math is a little bit easier to show. But when you can go get a similar pay with, not as good of benefits, but some benefits and, no union protection, except for one hospital in the area. And, but when you're, 22, 23, 24 years old, you're not necessarily looking that deep into it. All you're looking at is, hey, they just fired a bunch of probationary employees for no good reason. And you don't have that situation doesn't have to exist very long. And particularly, and again, I'll use Iowa City as an example, before you have to start shutting down entire wards and consolidating staff so that you can then, halfway have staff on the wards that you're keeping open. And we had that situation after COVID. We had that that has happened periodically, and it's almost exclusively because of self-inflicted injuries of management freezing job recruitments. And you have to keep these. There are some jobs that just have high turnover rates. Working inpatient as an RN is one of those. But it's also, if you don't have an inpatient units in your hospital, the system crumbles, because why have a cardiology clinic or a cardiac cath lab or an OR if, all of those things are predicated on having a functional inpatient unit to take care of those patients. And I think that that's what Musk and, to a lesser extent, Trump maybe, because I don't know that he has much of a plan. But I think Musk is very much attuned to what those people, like United Healthcare and these large for-profit healthcare groups are telling him to go forward with, to cripple the system. And I think that it's a very real chance that if these attacks continue, that 6 months from now things could look very dire.
Yeah. Well, in the case of the Veterans Administration, how many? What are we talking about in terms of scope? How many veterans hospitals are there in the country, or how many patients are we talking about, or employees? What are we? Do you have a sense of that?
Yeah. So just in terms of magnitude, the VA is the largest hospital system in the country. We have about 187 hospitals and thousands of community clinics and specialty rehab operations and things like that. About 300,000 employees, and that we're everywhere, literally. And I think that we're the largest. Well, we're the largest educator of healthcare providers. So whether it's physicians, nurses, respiratory therapists, we are the largest place that all those people go to get clinical education. It's our employees are expected to spend a lot of their time educating new professionals, whether they stay at the VA or they go someplace else, which is one of the missions of the hospital system, is to provide that platform and education. The other one is to do research, and VA funded research is huge. We've discovered innumerable things from dialysis forward. That was an invention of VA physicians, was dialysis, and the scope of it, if the VA goes away, is all those things cost money, or probably a better way to say it is all those things don't make a profit. So doing basic research, doing even advanced clinical research for stuff that's just almost ready for release, there's no money to be made in that, unless you're a pharmaceutical company. The pharmaceutical company is going to make some money, but actually maintaining labs and having people out doing population studies, none of that makes money. Educating all these students is a huge investment of VA time and resources and people, but that doesn't make any money, and that's why private hospital systems don't do any of that, or very little of it. And the same way for maintaining all the footprint that the VA has so that it's accessible to veterans. A good example is under the George W. Bush administration, United Healthcare basically said, we will buy you out. We will take over everything in Georgia and Florida, and we'll take all your patients and we will get them care. Well, what they said, what they really meant was, we will take the capitated amount that you pay per person to take care of somebody at the VA, and we will mail them a card that says United Healthcare on it. And we will treat them exactly as we treat the people that have our insurance, which means, you'll be denied, and then you'll be delayed. And, until you're either frustrated and quit calling them, or you don't ever call them at all because it's confusing, and, engaging in the system is a challenge. And once you get engaged in the system in the private healthcare, there's nobody there to advocate for you. And here within VA, every patient that's enrolled has a primary care provider. That primary care provider has a team of, an RN, an LPN, and a clerk that they all know by first name. And, if they've got a question, they can call up and talk to their case manager anytime they want to call in, during hours. And then we have a 24-hour nurse line that they can call in after hours. And there really is that seamless level of healthcare, or seamless web there that doesn't exist in any other kind of.
So it sounds like the VAs should be expanded to the rest of the populace rather than the other way around. And I think you said earlier when we were talking before we started the show, it's a good argument for a single payer healthcare.
Oh, I absolutely. I mean, we've got good health insurance as federal employees, but I would much rather get my care through the VA than through the private healthcare system that, I have to navigate through. Far easier and, much more customer friendly and accountable. And I think that's, again, it's a punchline of what, when Musk says it, of accountability. It's like accountability. We're accountable to everybody. And I don't say that like bitterly. I think it's a great thing that we're accountable to our patients. We're accountable to like the veteran service organizations, like the Disabled Veterans of America, or, select any of those groups that come in and, advocate for our patients and, work collaboratively to start new programs. I certainly have opinions about some of our members of Congress, but we're accountable to all of them. And, more importantly, I think the VA is transparent. Like most federal agencies, it's really kind of all out there to see. There is no mechanism to like actually keep anything secret, unless it's like secret. But like, a bad outcome for a patient, we're not only mandated to report that and disclose it to the patient immediately. We talk them through of, these are your rights, and, if you want to sue, this is how to do it. There's none of this. I mean, that's why, I kind of laugh when people say, oh, look, there was this horrible outcome at, one VA hospital in New Mexico or wherever. And I'm like, yeah, you want to know how many of those bad outcomes happened at your private hospital down the road? Try to find out, because you'll never know. And our infection rates and stuff like that, we disclose. I mean, all that's out there partially for researchers to use, because we're one of the largest databases that researchers have to work from to look at populations of patients. So it would be shocking to the whole system. Not just for veterans, but for the rest of the healthcare, for lack of a better way to say it, pipeline of professionals and innovations that come out of the VA. The electronic health record, I remember, 15 years ago when, everybody's moving to the electronic health record. And I'm like, hey, that's great news. We've been doing it for 10 years. And yours is just a copy of ours with a graphic interface. And because it was a publicly developed piece of software, anybody could use it. But, they put some click boxes on it, and all of a sudden, somebody's a millionaire.
Yep. Yep. So let me ask you, I want to switch to, your union a little bit here. And, I've read that the membership in the American Federation of Government Employees is soaring right now because people had the option to join or not are joining because of the attacks from Trump and Musk. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about some of the things that your union is doing either nationally or locally, and some of the engagement maybe you've had with your rank and file, and have you seen that growth as well in Iowa City?
I think in Iowa City, our experience has been a little bit different than other locals, and that's only because we have about 85% penetration of what our potential bargaining unit is. Or potential membership is. Some locals are much lower than that, and I think that they have seen a huge influx of people. I think we've seen, for us, which is a large influx of people, of those 10 to 15 to 20% that have never been members, and have been reaching out and joining, which has been nice. But I think that the way that we've done that is twofold. One, we communicate pretty regularly and aggressively with our local and the members through the private emails and texts. And if you're not a member and you're wanting to know what's going on, people tend to give you your opinion when they say, "Hey, did anything else come out from the union?" And they say, "Well, you get it yourself. Why are you asking me?" And they say, "Well, I'm not a member." And they're like, "Well, then why would I tell you?" There's an easy way to fix that.
Yep. Join the union, brother, sister.
And I think national, compared to other, I don't know if there's been other, it's tough to find something similar to this in the past, but is communicating very aggressively. I think that they had, with the Project 2025, they basically had we've had the playbook for a while. And I think that, the leadership, I think nationally was very good about basically combing through that and saying, okay, well, these are the 12 possible things that are going to come that are going to impact us directly. These are the things that are going to impact us indirectly. And I think had a very good communication plan to take those both out to the memberships and to the leadership of the locals. And which has been good because the talking points on this, it turns into inside baseball pretty fast. If people don't understand what it is, you start talking about, reductions in force and what does that mean? And, they're going after these probationary employees. Well, what's next? Well, we can speculate on what's next because they said what they want to do. They want to, they want to, largely change all these agencies. Mostly, we are in a slightly different situation in the VA because they can't outright say that they want to destroy us. Because our patients are pretty fiercely loyal to us, and everybody at least has to give lip service, even in the Republican Party, to the fact that veterans deserve health care. And so I think with us, there probably are not going to be, it's death by 1,000 cuts rather than one, firing half the employees in one fell swoop. Because they don't have, the thing about it is the VA has been underfunded for a number of years. You don't have to kick it very hard to tip it over. And that's what, I think we've been struggling with how to communicate, one, that the things that the administration says are going on aren't really going on. There really is still a hiring freeze. They have removed these probationary employees, and that, we're really on this precipice of, if they do nothing, we're going to roll off the cliff. And, it's going to be a...
What do you mean by that? Could you elaborate on that a little?
Right. So, it means we have a gerontology clinic here at the VA in Iowa City. Most VAs don't have it. It's not a mandated service that we have to offer, but because of where we are and the specialists that we have access to, we have this clinic, and that does fantastic work. But it's going to be, can we keep the cardiology clinic open or the gerontology clinic open? Well, they're going to make a decision at some point that the gerontology clinic was nice to have, but we can't have that anymore because there's nobody to staff it because we've moved all the staff out. Same thing with as we, get to the point where there's no nurses to move back into inpatient from outpatient jobs where they're case managers and managing these populations of patients, whether it be people in dialysis, people in cardio, that have whatever disease process and clinic they're managing them through, and in primary care, that well runs dry at some point, and then you start closing wards one after another, and at that point, well, the OR can't do these cases today because there's no beds for them to go to when they're done, and at that point, you have to, try to get them to another hospital to get the operation that they need, or you delay their care. And then that's when the folks who want that money say, well, look, the VA is a failing system. All these wait times have gone up, and it is inevitably going to impact the quality of the care at some point.
Yeah.
I think that there's
all the resources out. Yeah.
That we've been doing for several years under, partially dealing with the Republican budgets that come out of Congress, where, they keep trying to push more care out to the United Healthcares of the world. So, and then holding less within the VA, which removes money from the VA system. And then, but, people have, it's interesting to see, upper management who does believe, good, bad, or indifferent, with the mission of the agency to deliver health care to veterans. And they're like, okay, so they're doing this thing to throw sand into the gears of the machine. And they're like, well, okay, well, we'll just do it this way. Or, more likely too, the bargaining unit is saying, okay, well, they're going to say we can't fill these jobs, but, how are we going to get supplies from point A to point B? And, there's a lot of those conversations going on right now in a number of the hospitals kind of in the Midwest here that I talk to the presidents a lot about, that housekeepers are going, well, I'll go over to logistics and deliver those supplies. You just got to pay me to do it. But, but the system is, has put it down that no, those jobs are not needed. So you cannot have somebody work overtime from another department to deliver those sterile supplies, for instance.
That's crazy. That's crazy. Let me ask you about, it's been in the news a lot lately, the Dodge, or Elon Musk's agency, has been sending out these letters saying, tell us 5 things that you did over the last week. And so is this something that your employees have received, and your members? And what is your national union, or what are you as president of Local 2547 telling your members about these letters and how they should deal with them?
Yeah, so so as far as the national union's response to it was very aggressive and very quick, and I thought was particularly good. They filed unfair labor practices about it and a lawsuit, because OPM essentially can't tell you to do anything. They're a non-entity as far as being able to give you an order to do something. Now, some agencies have said don't respond. That's been the VA, or response is voluntary. So that's been VA's management response to that. As far as what the union has instructed people to do, because management's been slow to respond to both rounds of these things from OPM and Musk. We basically told people to put it back on their supervisors and, demand that they give them an order to either do this or not do this. It's, obviously I think that, anybody that thinks about this is, realize this has no purpose other than to just harass people and make them angry. I mean, again, it's a great recruiting tool because everybody, literally every federal employee got this. But some people take it incredibly seriously, and it's just monumentally stressful for them. And that's what Musk wants. He wants to harass people to the point where they leave federal service just because they can't deal with it anymore. And we've tried to put that back on the supervisors. I guess I don't have a good idea of how many agencies have ordered their people to respond. I know that the Department of Defense today ordered its 800,000 civilian employees to sit down and, as we lovingly refer to it, write a letter about what they did on their summer vacation. But cynically, I think he's using it as a way to train his AI, because he's going to go through there and, comb out multiple weeks of responses from the same individual. And, I think there's going to be a lot of data generated by that has nothing to do with what people do for a job in the federal government. I thought, as a staff nurse, how would I respond to that? Is like, what do you don't want any of this information. I don't know what you're doing other than just haranguing people for no reason. And
what's the purpose of the supervisor as well? It's like, why are you why are you hiring supervisors and then asking people stuff that they should know, that their job is to make sure to direct the workforce?
Well, and how does an electrician respond to what are the 5 things I did last week? Same thing for a staff nurse. Unless you're an engineer who's doing long-term construction planning, you don't have a lot to say that's different than I was doing nurse stuff, or I was doing electrician stuff. I made the boiler plant not explode. Which I consider very important.
Right. No, but they're painting federal employees as these, lazy people that stay at home, that didn't come back to work after COVID and don't really want to do anything and stuff like that. And, whatever. You've mentioned your members, in fact, were working during COVID, risking their lives and things like that. And, who knows? So it's shameful what they're doing, but I want to talk a little bit about the union busting aspect of some of this too, and how you look at that, and the whole point of trying to get around some of the laws and rights that unions have fought for in the federal sector. I think you told me before we started the interview your union was started in the 1930s with no rights at all. And it's built up to what it is today. Fight Back News ran an editorial recently that compared what's going on now to the professional air traffic controllers in the early 1980s, which I know you're familiar with. But for our Fight Back Radio listeners, that was an opening salvo by the Reagan administration when they got elected, that to send a signal to the private sector that. They weren't, that they were union busters, and they were going to be behind any of those kind of efforts in the private sector as well. So I was wondering if you could comment on that a little bit.
Yeah, I think that they're I mean, I think they've done some very strategic things when they first came into office that they weren't attentive to the last time. One of those would be removing the Democratic member from the Merit Systems Protection Board, the federal equivalent of the NLRB. It's the FLRA, and they removed the.
So this is a labor board that, for people that aren't in labor, the NLRB I'm more familiar with is the National Labor Relations Board. So that's like it enforces the law that affects private sector workers, and so there's another equivalent body for federal workers, and then many states, not all of them, have similar things for states. So this is if you file an unfair labor practice, this is where it goes, and they have to deal with it.
Yeah. And I think that they're, basically they have crippled the referees of the game. They if you win at arbitration, you get somebody reinstated, or a large suspension reversed, or you win a grievance on a contract violation, and then the agency appeals it. It goes to the FLRA. But if they don't have a quorum, they can't issue a decision. So it just sits there. And, that happened during the George W. Bush administration. They left the seats vacant. And there were, when Obama came in, there were cases that were 8 years old where an employee, had their job reinstated, and, but the agency had taken exceptions to it, and it had just sat there and festered. I think just like with the NLRB in the private sector, places where they've had elections, places like Amazon or Starbucks, the only people that can make them come to the table or adjudicate these unfair labor practices is the NLRB, and they have crippled them. There's no way to, if they even if they had if you had a good case, or even if the employer had a good case, there's no way to get a decision. And I mean, I think that because no decision is winning for employers, for federal agencies, for being able to, just impair the basic rights that are in the federal sector are guaranteed under the law, and are relatively fairly administrated. And I would say, if I had to compare the FLRA to other boards, I would say it's it has been bad in at some points. Last time Trump tried to put, it was functioning, and he tried to put bad people on there, and they had some really horrible decisions. But after they were in there for about a year, they were like, oh yeah, I mean, this is just contradictory to the law, and they started to rule for the unions. It was kind of odd to see, but you could see the progression in their thinking with the decisions that they were writing, because the first few of them were just nonsense, and then I think that they started to move towards reality. But I think that they've really I think that there are plans out there in 2025, the Project 2025. One of them is to take away union rights from everybody that's under the Department of Homeland Security, which would be the TSA, and the Border Patrol, and a host of those law enforcement type organizations. The Bureau of Prisons would be another one that they want to take away the union rights from. And I think that they could very well try to come after VA, because VA is probably, we have a very organized bargaining council and a very unified response across the country, considering how many locals are involved. And I think that makes us a target. We have probably one of the better contracts in the federal government, and it's kind of the model contract for the federal sector. But I think that the way that Trump would do that, it was essentially with a stroke of the pen, because he can say he has the ability to say it's for national security reasons. Now, he's tried that before, or presidents have tried that before, but they've never done it for anything other than like legitimate intelligence things. Like you had to have a top secret clearance, or parts of the Department of Justice, or parts of several agencies, even the Border Patrol and some others, where you are looking at actual highly classified intelligence, but you're still just an agent. Those folks are excluded from the bargaining unit. Now, whether I think that's legitimate or not, it's a whole another question. But we believe that's what he'll try to do, is somehow say, and he'll stretch that definition as far as he can get away from stretching it. But then there are cases out there where they have tried to exclude people from bargaining units and weren't successful. Yeah, I don't know whether that would be the case now, particularly for the Supreme Court.
I mean, there's a whole history here. I think I think it starts maybe in the federal sector, but you see it in every public sector where, government jobs were used politically. Like here in Chicago, Old Man Daly was famous for you worked in the streets and sanitation department. You had election day off because you had to go knock on doors and do precincts if you wanted to keep your job. And there was this whole thing of different, whether it be the president of the United States, governor or whatever, would replace people with people loyal politically, or families and relatives of loyal political people. And, through struggle, people that were interested in good government, but also unions that were interested in fairness and on the job, through these civil service, and then unions got developed that had rights. And it seems to me that Trump and Musk are trying to roll this back and demand loyalty from top to bottom, and have, not only cut jobs, but the ones that do exist in the federal government, where our people are demand a political loyalty that's, beyond what people's competence levels are. I mean, you're not a good scientist because you voted for this or that guy. You're a good scientist because you studied science and you learned how to practice it and implement it. So I don't know. That goes back to the origins.
That's the part of dealing with federal employees, whether their politics are right or left. I think that in general, that's one of the other things that's really angering people, is this cult of personality and demanding personal loyalty from federal employees is a losing proposition for him in terms of like actually winning anyone over. Just because, this hospital, and I take it back down to kind of the local level, but I've heard this, whatever the workplace is, whether it's from Rock Island down the road from us here is a huge arsenal that makes all sorts of things for the Army and the other military branches, and they're like, no, this is our factory. This is not George Bush's factory. It's not W's factory. It's not Obama's factory. It's not Biden's factory. Sure as hell isn't Trump's factory. And, we make this stuff, and it's going out for people to use. And, we're responsible for it working correctly when it does. And I think that that's the level of, of ownership, again, within pretty much any federal workplace, whether you're talking about, getting people their Social Security benefits, or, processing a disability claim, or, within the VA, getting patients what they're entitled to. It's like our mission is to serve the, American people, be accountable to them, and not to, whoever it happens to sit in the president's chair. We're accountable to the rules and the Constitution. We're not accountable to a cult of personality. And I think that's Musk and Trump do not understand that. It's this personal transactional loyalty that they're trying to instill, and they can force that through that first couple layers of political appointees pretty easily, because you can give them some sort of loyalty test. But that's why he wants to dismantle that next level of civil service. The name that it used to be called Schedule F when it was in the last time, and now it's called policy and something. It escapes me, but basically stripping out that whole level of professionals that run like the Veterans Health Administration or NASA or the CDC, and trying to strip away that whole level of people with the technical knowledge to say, no, that's counter to law and we can't do that. Now, a lot of those people have left because they're like, I'm not going to take part in this, poisonous activity. I mean, one of the best resignation letters was from 21 of the software engineers that were at the digital, whatever the Doge replaced an existing office of the president, which was basically a federal digital service or something like that. And all of these people had been professionals at Google and Amazon and wherever, and had left their private lives after, however many years there, and said, I want to serve in government so that we can, modernize the systems. And it was created by Obama. And really it was, I don't want to say it was, kind of boring technocrats, but they were like, your job is to go into these agencies, whether it be Social Security or the IRS or whoever, and make sure that their systems work for the people they're supposed to be delivering service to. And they did a lot of really interesting things. But then this clown car from Doge parked in their spot and said, no, you're going to go out there and, give us access to all these different points within the federal government so that they can, have control of that data. And they said, no, not going to do it. And they all resigned en masse. And a lot, I would hazard to guess that, a lot of those people were the only people that knew how to move some of those levers in any kind of a timely fashion. So I think that will be an interesting little subreddit on this, in the years to come of, what became of that, and then there's just like the absurd examples, like where they fired all of the nuclear safety technicians, which is a fancy name for guys with machine guns who guard the nuclear weapons. Literally. And they fired all of them, and it is not an easy job. I mean, I just know it because we of the people that move through the VA, but it's not easy to find those people because they have to have like top secret clearances, and I don't know how to MacGyver a nuclear weapon to keep it from exploding. But they're not people that you want that it takes 5 minutes to recruit.
That's right.
And I mean, just the pomposity of their response. Well, we're going to make some mistakes. Well, you know why government moves slowly sometimes is because people die when you make mistakes. And somebody has their disability benefits interrupted for 2 months. I know that doesn't seem like a big deal for you, Elon Musk, but for them that means they've lost their housing and they're not eating. They're now homeless, and in the meantime they've had their ID stolen, and they may never recover from that event.
Yeah, no, that's terrible. I'm gonna, we're winding down here. Unfortunately, it's this time has went so fast. But before we end the episode, I want to give you, Pat, a chance to, say anything that we haven't brought up in the interview, anything that you want to get across to our Fight Back Radio listeners.
Yeah, I think the big thing is for folks in the labor movement, we're our locals are going to be coming out from the hospitals more. We kind of sometimes are hesitant to go out and interact outside of our four walls, and it's like many things in the federal government, we're technocrats and we're comfortable in our little hidey hole, and and doing that kind of public activism is an uncomfortable part of being in the labor movement. But I think that our membership right now is very motivated. I would say that it would be unusual, especially in the coming weeks, if there's not active pickets outside VA hospitals, particularly around the continuing resolution and when we'll be working for free if they don't fund the government. And that those kind of activities, I think here in Iowa City, for instance, we've done 2 events directed towards our local congressperson, and are going to be doing pickets as it comes up towards the continuing resolution. I think those are going to be occurring everywhere. I would encourage people that, especially if they have Republican members of Congress, to call often about putting a stop to this, because we essentially only need to move the needle, 3 members in order to change most of these votes. And I don't know what their stomach is for conflict, especially if you're in a district that, you may have, like our congressional district, the Republican won by less than 1,000 votes. Well, there's 7,000 employees or federal employees in her district. So I think that's at least 21,000 really pissed off nuclear families, votes right there.
That's right. And not to mention the veterans and other folks, maybe people that work for the post office who are feeling threatened. It's a lot. Yes, I agree.
Yeah, and I really think that not to drag it out, but I think that the why behind this is it does come down to an anti-democratic movement of taking away public services and turning it over to for-profit entities. And that's really what it comes down to at the end of the day, whether it be the post office or, you cripple the Social Security Administration and people are getting their benefits delayed. And, well, we're just going to turn it off over to XYZ Corporation that's going to bid on this contract, and then we'll let them do it and without any oversight. And that's the very strategic part of this that they've done is, you get rid of the Inspector General. Who do you report these abuses to? Well, there's nobody to report it to right now in most of the agencies.
Yeah, no, that's right. So I appreciate it. I appreciate you being our guest here. I appreciate you telling Fight Back Radio listeners about the things that you're facing, and I look forward to seeing you on the picket line, Pat. We've had some here in Chicago already. I've been to the VA just recently for a rally there, and I expect more. And there's groups, like Jobs with Justice and the central labor bodies that are helping with AFGE to do some of those things around the country.
Yeah, and our central labor bodies have been very much engaged. We've particularly here with our experience, but the other thing is with the a lot of the unorganized workers stuff, like Center for Workers Justice, which is here in Iowa City, with the immigrant communities, and trying to it's just one more tentacle on the same beast.
Yep. No, that's right. That's right. I absolutely. But I appreciate your work, and like I say, we look forward to seeing you on the picket lines and in the streets. So thanks a lot, Pat.
Thank you, Richard.
Yes, well, that was Pat Kearns, and thank you for that. And right now, as you can see, veterans are being attacked, workers are being attacked. If you listen to our last episode with Delilah, trans people are being attacked, black people. Clearly, immigrants are at the front end of the attack. Trump's going after everybody, and we need to stand together. We need to build a broad front against Donald Trump, and so I encourage people to do that. Particularly, he's acting like, oh, well, by cutting all these cuts to workers, that'll be good for you. But in fact, it's good for the rich people, and he refuses to make any cuts for them at all. So I want to encourage people to get involved. I know the postal workers, the letter carriers union is doing a march in cities across the country on March 23rd. I encourage you to go to that. This episode will be released just right after International Women's Day. So I also encourage people to study up on working women's history. Read the history of that movement that created International Women's Day, the textile workers in New York, or read about Clara Zetkin or Alexandra Kollontai or one of the working class heroes, sheroes from our movement. Also, for those of you that are going to be in Chicago on April 26th, I want to encourage you. I'm going to get the Lifetime Achievement Award from the Freedom Road Socialist Organization, and they had moved their People's Thanksgiving, and we're doing the Working Class Awards Dinner to help build for May Day. So on April 26th, we're going to have that event. There's going to be several other people getting awards, but it'll be a nice event to meet people, and I'd like to meet Fight Back Radio listeners. If you're interested in it, you can get a ticket at we'll put it in the show notes, but it's the bit.ly, bit.ly/ and then it's People's Struggle 2024. So it's PPLS Struggle, STRUGGLE 2024. And you can get tickets there. But it's a nice event every year at the People's Thanksgiving. Now we're going to change the name of that as well. But the Working Class Awards Dinner. So check that out. But get involved. Go to some of these marches that are happening. Go join an organization. And if you haven't already. One last thing I want to say before we sign off here. Our previous episode and created a little controversy, and people weighed in on the black trans thing with Delilah. I thought did an excellent job, but I'm interested in your opinions on that episode. If you have one, go back and listen to it. You can reach me at richard.fightbackradio@gmail.com. So we'll put all of this stuff in the show notes, and so I want to thank the production team, which is going to make the show notes after I say all this. Shane Tremley especially, but also Vince Olson, Dodd McColgan, and Natalie Pranis. And I'm Richard Berg for the entire Fight Back Radio team, saying until next time, all power to the people.
I mean, obviously I can blather on for a long time about, public service and why I think it's a better beast. But
no, I think that's good because people don't, the opposite is what you get, thrown at you all the time. If you're, on whatever, on the television, even the liberal television doesn't do what you just did. So it's important for people to hear that. So I appreciate it.